welcome to Interface on SABC3. My name is Tembi Samakhele. The Pestalozzi Trust, a legal defense fund protecting the rights of parents to choose their children's education, is at loggerheads with the Department of Basic Education over the choice of curriculum that homeschooling parents have to use. The parents would rather use the other curricula instead of CAPS. Among many reasons that they give, the trust is not happy with the standard of education in South Africa, which was recently ranked among the lowest by the World Economic Forum report. Tonight in studio, we are joined by Professor Lara Rajput, who is from the University of Johannesburg's Childhood Education Department. And from our Sea Point studios, we are joined by the chairman of the Pestalozzi Trust, Mr. Bowe van der Eems. And we also joined in the Johannesburg studio by the Department of Basic Education's Dr. Moses Simelane. He is the Director for Inclusive Education, within which homeschooling falls. Now, as always, you know that if you would like to take part in the discussion, you can always do so by finding us on Facebook at Interface on SABC or at Tembi Samakhele. Before we delve into our discussion, let's take a quick look at this insert compiled by Zama Buthelezi.
South Africa's basic education is fraught with many challenges. There is a huge shortage of teachers. Severe overcrowding is a common feature in many of the public schools. Some infrastructure leaves a lot to be desired, and many educational experts are not happy with the government's curriculum. While there are parents who can afford to send their children to private schools at a huge cost, some opt for homeschooling.
Tell me, Mr. Bowditch, just what are you trying to do with the men during the dark watch?
As a remedial therapist, Rieta Viljoen received a lot of requests from parents who wanted her to evaluate their children. As a result, she developed an interest in homeschooling.
I was amazed at what I was seeing. Children that were so self-confident, they had a love for learning, they read a lot. They read so much more than what I've seen at school.
When Viljoen started planning her own family, she looked into homeschooling as an alternative for her own children.
I've started to homeschool right from the beginning because my mindset was like that, whole of life is a learning process. So I believe that learning isn't just through books. It's the whole of life that's a learning process.
Viljoen says there are many benefits to homeschooling. Children get to spend more time with their siblings, families have more time together, but most importantly, she's able to incorporate different curriculums during lessons. But when parents register with the department as homescholars, they are compelled to use the CAPS curriculum. It is this particular stance that has the Pestalozzi Trust at loggerheads with the Department of Basic Education. That leaves the question, what happens to unregistered children who complete their basic education through homeschooling? Zama Buthelezi for Interface.
And so let's kick off the discussion with our guest in Cape Town, who is the chairman of the Pestalozzi Trust, Mr. Bowe van der Eems. Thank you so much for your time. Understandable that, we should have different options available to parents in order to educate their children. But why would you want to advocate for a different curriculum to the one that other South African schools are using?
According to the Constitution, when it comes to matters concerning children, the best interest of the child is of paramount importance. And if you apply that principle to the right to education, and you also take into account that each child is unique, this means that it must be possible to customize the curriculum for each individual child. This is the ultimate form of decolonized education, and this is possible with home education. But with a one-size-fits-all curriculum, where you have to progress at a predetermined pace, this is not possible. And that is the reason why homeschooling parents are not in favor of one-size-fits-all national curriculum.
All right.
Because they cannot adapt it to the needs of the child.
Okay, let's find out from the department then. Dr. Simelane, this sounds like a reasonable request. Each child has got special needs. This is why I'm homeschooling my child, because I want to tailor-make the package, as it were, for my child. Why can't the department allow me to do that?
Well, I think maybe as a starting point, we need to understand that the department has come a long way in terms of transforming the curriculum. At the present moment, we are introducing 2 additional streams to the academic stream. And we also are putting measures in place to actually intervene and support those learners who might require additional support simply because they might not be, at the same pace with their peers in the classroom. So there is a whole host of interventions and strategies and support measures that are put in place to actually mediate the offering of the curriculum. So it's not a question of, having every learner being forced to actually follow the curriculum at a specific pace. What then happens is those learners who happen to fall behind with the rest of their class or their peers, there will be additional measures. For instance, additional time, and there is also a policy on accommodations and concessions to accommodate the diversity of needs of our learner population.
Okay, but where a parent says, I've done the research, I now have found another curriculum that I think is best suited for my child or children, why can't the department be in support of that?
The department is not actually against choices that parents make for their children. But what becomes very important from the department's perspective is that whatever choices we make and decisions that we make, they should always be in the best interest of the child. Maybe to take this discussion just one step back, we need to understand that homeschooling is actually legislated in the South African Schools Act. So it is allowed. Parents are allowed to make such choices. If they prefer to teach their children at home, there are no problems, because ultimately what becomes important is every child in South Africa must access education, because it's their right. So it shouldn't be seen as a question of basic education versus homeschooling, or schooling versus home educated learners. What we have to work on as parents and as the department and as government is to make sure that the right of every child to access education is exercised and is accorded.
Okay, Professor Rajput, I want to get your thoughts on this one, but before I do, let me just pose this question to you, Mr. van der Eems. Dr. Simelane says there are provisions made already to allow a parent to tailor-make, as it were, the package, the educational package in the homeschooling system for their kids, and that you don't need to have another curriculum to be able to do that. Your views?
Okay, unfortunately I can't comment on whether those provisions will meet the requirements of customization, because I haven't seen them. But even if there were provisions, I very much doubt that it will cover such a huge spectrum of individual needs and learning styles and interests. So I think it will probably be very difficult to adapt the national curriculum to the enormous diversity that you find in the homeschooling communities.
Okay. Before we go to break, Prof, is it in the best interest of our children to have that open kind of system where you say, whatever curriculum you feel is best for your child, the basic education department should be able to allow that?
I think what is important to look at here is we in the world of training teachers, teacher education. And if we look at the intensive training that our student teachers have to go through in the 4 years that they're learning to become just basic teachers, not even teachers with an honours or a master's, etc. I think one needs to be very careful as a parent to say that you're an expert, and you can now gauge or look at all these curricula and say, oh, this one is better than that one. You might have done some research on the internet, and of course, every researcher out there will pose their curriculum as the best one. Because, of course, you want to show that what you've done and yes, exactly. Yeah. And especially if there's money involved. But I'm just always a bit hesitant at looking at you as a parent. I'm not saying you're not the expert of your child. Of course you're the expert of your child, but are you the education expert? And I think that's where a lot of curricula come in, or little whatever activities you do with your kids that you get off the internet or from a curriculum that looks nice, but is it really supporting your child's learning? And I think that's the question we must ask.
And that's the point we'll pick it up on when we return from the break. And as always, we do welcome your thoughts. Find us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll take some of those thoughts right after this. And we continue with our discussion with our guest, Professor Lara Rajput, who is from the University of Johannesburg. Mr. Bowe van der Eems is in our Sea Point studios in Cape Town, and he is the chairperson of the Pestalozzi Trust. Dr. Moses Simelane is with the Department of Basic Education. And Mr. van der Eems, here's a point that Professor Rajput brought before the break, and that is parents as education experts. Is it a good idea, in your view, to place the decision on which curriculum a child should be learning from in the hands of parents who may have good intentions and may even know how to teach their children, but might not be education experts enough to know the difference between the various curricula that are available?
Yes, the first point I want to make is that home education is a lot different than school education. And research has shown that you don't need to have any education qualification to give home education. Therefore, the fact that homeschooling parents are not qualified does not mean they're not able to give good home education. And so research has shown that there's no correlation between the qualifications of parents and the quality of education they're giving. So that is as an introductory. Secondly, it's true that parents may not know whether a curriculum is as good, one curriculum is better than the other, but they do have the best knowledge on their own child. But the difference between a parent and a Department of Education is that when a parent chooses a curriculum and it doesn't work, they can change their mind in 2 hours. Where if the Department of Education wants to change the curriculum, it's a 10, 20-year project to develop it and deploy it.
Okay, so, but let me ask you this,
parents can do trial and error. They try this one.
I hear you.
Doesn't work. Next week they try something different.
All right, let me ask you this, Mr. van der Eems.
Mr. van der Eems, we are running. We always advise that when parents buy curriculum, just buy the minimum that you can. Buy the books and the learning support material for just 1 year. So if it doesn't work for you, it's not too expensive to change.
All right, Mr. van der Eems, the question I wanted to ask you earlier was, if you accept that parents might not be those experts on the curriculum, why not leave it to the department to make that decision on behalf of South African children and trust the department to know and to have done the basic research and to find the right solution for South African kids?
I think there's been a lot of discussion on the national curriculum in the years 2001 and 2002, and there's been a lot of opposition to the national curriculum for philosophical and religious reasons, for the limited amount of subjects. So there are lots of reasons why parents are not convinced why it's the best curriculum, and homeschooling parents have made lots of presentations to the Department of Education in those years, to the Minister Kader Asmal at that stage, and somewhere in the Department of Education there is a whole room of faxes and letters and emails full of concerns about the curriculum which haven't been addressed. So from the start, parents were not comfortable with this curriculum, and they're still not comfortable with it.
All right, so 2 points raised there. One is the department will take way too long to change anything should they discover that this is not the right curriculum for the kids. And the second one is these concerns that have been raised about the curricula, particularly the CAPS, that are not being addressed by the department.
I think it's important to note that, whenever there is a curriculum development process, the department actually undertakes a lot of research. And I can assure you that the curriculum that is being offered currently, it's curriculum that was researched and it was even benchmarked against other curricula across the world, across different countries. One can mention, for instance, Australia is one of the countries that our CAPS has been benchmarked against. And we also involve researchers, even from quality councils such as Umalusi, in making sure that we produce
But Dr. Simelane, let me just play devil's advocate here for a moment and say the other administrations that have come before yours would also have argued the same, that they've done the research, and we've seen in South Africa where a curriculum has had to be pulled back and we introduce another one because that one didn't work.
Well, the transformation is a process, and curriculum development work is actually cannot be cast in stone. We also need to be mindful of that fact. It's a process, and there are measures that are put in place to make sure that the curriculum that is provided is one of quality. Maybe one should also make a distinction between policy development and implementation. I think generally there is an accepted view in South Africa in general, forget about basic education, that we have got good policies, but the challenge is always comes with implementation. So one should also be mindful of that as a matter of fact.
Prof, as somebody who's not within the space, if you look at what is being done in CAPS and what Dr. Simelane is saying, that, it's transformation, it takes time. And you hear on the other side the concerns of the parents who say, but by the time you discover that something is not working well for the kids, it'll take you 20 years to change it. Or, you're not addressing the concerns of my child, and this is why I chose homeschooling. Where do you stand when you hear this standing from the outside?
I think, first of all, I just want to come back to a point that was raised before, that if you like what's being done in a curriculum, you keep it. If you see it's not working, you chop and change to something else. This ad hoc kind of change to one curriculum, I don't like this, okay, let me do this next week, really, really interferes with children's learning and conceptual change. There's a reason why a curriculum is written in a certain linear way. And if you chop and change curricula, this works, this doesn't work, let me throw this out, let me bring that in, it can actually confuse children's learning much more than center them. And I think it's really, I'm not saying that there aren't excellent parents out there that are teaching their children very well. I think it's just that we need to make sure that children, of course, you will be biased with your own child, you know, and you will think that your child's keeping up to standard, etc. There has to be some standard that you adhere to. So if you do decide to do homeschooling, you must make sure that you benchmark your child as well, that it's not just ad hoc curricula that you take in. The second point that you asked me about is in terms of the curriculum and maybe changing curricula, etc. Yes, we have seen quite a few curricular changes through the last few years. I think that's where the responsibility comes into good teacher education, because the curriculum is good. I think it's the way that it's implemented, that the onus is now on universities, such as, for instance, we have at the University of Johannesburg now a school that we've built on campus where we train our teacher students while they are learning to become teachers, also to observe children in the classrooms, etc. So
but
that's
this is
where
not a problem that a homeschooling parent would have, because they are the ones teaching this same curriculum, or they are getting people that they trust to teach this curriculum. But these parents are saying the curriculum itself is a problem. Let's pick it up after the break. We're going to take a short break. We're back after this. Welcome back. We're still continuing with the discussion even off air, so apologies for that. We are talking about homeschooling, and I do want to take some of your thoughts, and hopefully I'll do so before the show ends. Do keep them coming, please, on Facebook. We are at Interface on SABC, or at Tembisa Magele. You also find us like that on Twitter. But I want to pose this question. Mr. Boe van der Eems from the Pestalozzi Trust. Something that Prof said before the break is there's nothing wrong with the curriculum itself. It's just about implementation. Do you agree with that?
I'm not an expert on this matter, but I would just pose the question, if there was nothing wrong with the curriculum, why do South Africans score so low? Is it really only implementation? I would just ask the question. And the second thing is, if the curriculum is really as good as they say, why do a lot of parents choose something different?
So this is becoming more of a quality discussion now, because Ephraim Gwaba on Facebook also says the department should allow parents to choose their own curriculum in order to achieve the desired performance for their child. The department is kind of losing this battle when you evaluate the quality of basic education. Give the parents the power to decide. Amos Chikonde says, with the adult literacy level so low, are the parents going to make informed choices? That's another element. So this becomes now about quality. What can you say to assure the Pestalozzi Trust and parents that are homeschooling their children that this curriculum is actually of good quality?
You know, I think what is important in this discussion, it's not a question of, you know, the Department of Basic Education versus parents, and the department actually restricting parents to make choices for what is in the best interest of their children. That is not the argument. Like I said initially, homeschooling is actually legislated. It's in South African Schools Act. It's recognized. It's a recognized practice, because the purpose that it serves is to ensure that those children who may not be in a position to receive education by going to school can be educated by their parents at home. But again, the issue of quality is very important. I think in recent years, as a Department of Basic Education, we've tried to pay attention to how we can lift the quality of our education offering. As a department, we are looking at issues of quality. We are looking at issues of efficiency. Coming to efficiency, we are even looking at issues of the high dropout rate, which has been prevalent over the years. And for that reason, on the curriculum front, what we've done as a department is to introduce 2 additional curriculum streams or pathways.
Okay, we're running out of time, and I do want to get your thoughts on this particular point that Dr. Simelane is making, and that is, if you look at the changes that have been made to the curriculum and what we have now in CAPS, which earlier you supported, and the issue of quality, the parents that are homeschooling their kids are not necessarily doing so because their children have got diabetes or other special needs. They're doing so in the majority, from what we read, because they are worried about the quality of the education that their children will receive. Are our kids getting inferior quality?
I think it's a question that I can't answer with one blanket statement.
Yeah.
You know, I think there are schools that are really, really doing a good job, and there are schools that need extra support. And I think the department does quite a lot in supporting these schools and trying to uplift these schools. I think, once again, for me, I'm just always hesitant in terms of homeschooling. How will you gauge whether you as a parent actually do give a better education than the school? And I think, once again, of course, it's your right as a parent to say, the school that my child is attending is not giving me the best education. I think I can do better. But what is your yardstick? Understand? And that's where the problem comes in terms of learning.
This is one of those days where I wish we had an entire hour, because I can see you also want to say something, but time is telling me to wrap this up ever so quickly.
Just one quick point.
Very, very quickly.
The point that I want to make is parents who educate their children at home must also be aware that there are circumstances that in the long run compel them to take their own children who have been homeschooled back to the school.
Listen,
and that is why the issue of standard becomes important.
We're going to have to ask for another hour or even another show to be able to continue with this one. But we're watching it very closely. And of course, we're very keen to hear what you think of the homeschooling debate, particularly when it comes to the curriculum. But thank you so much to my guests for joining us for this discussion. And thank you for making the time to join us here on Interface. Let's do this again next week at the same time. Good night.